This conference will now be recorded.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I will announce that all public sessions of the South Whitehall Township Board of Commissioners are electronically recorded, filed, and posted to our website for public access. Randy, if you would just briefly review the virtual meeting rules tonight.
Sure. We do have courtesy of the floor tonight at the end of the meeting agenda. For courtesy of the floor for non-agenda item related topics, the board president will call for courtesy of the floor when we reach that point of the agenda. Courtesy of the floor will be available for agenda items after each agenda item has been discussed by the Board of Commissioners. For in-person attendees, which we don't have any today, excuse me, simply raise your name, state your address for the record, and then you can proceed with asking your question. For the virtual attendees on GoToMeeting, please keep your microphone and telephones on mute so we don't have any avoidance of background noise or interference. Staff may mute your microphone if necessary if we start to experience some feedback issues. The chat feature is located in the upper right hand of your screen. If you do have a question, please simply state your full name, address, and question into the chat feature during that courtesy of the floor topic. Into the chat box, and then a staff member monitoring the GoToMeeting will read your question aloud for the board to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. So we will move into our first item on our agenda. Again, this is a workshop, so the first item for discussion tonight is the topic of our noise ordinance.
Sure. I can just give a real brief update. This was something that was asked by the Board of Commissioners. We received a few recent complaints, and then we were asked to do a little bit more homework on that to see how many complaints we've received in the police department since this noise ordinance has been enacted. I did circulate some of that information to the Board of Commissioners prior to tonight's meeting. We have received 301 total noise complaints through the police department since January of 2020. So it's about 2 years in the making. We've got 40 of those at the Giant there off of Tillman, 17 at Dollar General, 5 at Albright's, and then a mixed bag of other ones as well. Only 2 from Dorney Park. But I did provide an Excel spreadsheet for the board that lists all of those complaints, what they resulted from, how we responded. I do believe, Tom, only 3 or 4 have been officially cited. Since this is a new ordinance, it's not something we go out and cite for right away. There's an educational process behind this. So a lot of the contacts are really a first come, first serve type incident that we're running into. So we try to educate those residents if their neighbors calling on them about the noise ordinance. They may just not be aware that one is currently in place. So the police department is really still in the educational mode of this ordinance. But we do know there has been some concerns from the commissioners, so I think tonight is a good opportunity for us to hear what those concerns are. We did have some comparable research that Tom has done with other communities throughout the Commonwealth in terms of what their ordinance is, how it's situated. I know one of the big concerns was work on the weekends, so we did some research on that as well. That was provided in the information I sent to you in the email as well. So with that, I think we can open it up for discussion. Tom can help address any concerns and then how we might be able to continue to work on this ordinance to make sure it's the best fit for South Whitehall Township.
One thing before we go forward, they weren't issued citations as in court citations. They were issued violation tickets, which have a $100 fine. So there have been 3 of those issued.
Thanks, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Tom, thank you so much for doing all that work and putting together that spreadsheet. I was looking at all these different townships, boroughs, municipalities in terms of construction noise. And I did note, no, I can't find it. Marion, is it Lower Marion? And they do have, I see here, Saturday and Sunday at 9 a.m. start.
Mhm.
There are some municipalities that have no work on Sunday, like we're supposed to have just inside work.
Right, and that inside work, just to clarify, is you can do work inside, but it all comes down to where the noise cannot cross a real property boundary line. So in other words, if they're in there hammering, putting up drywall, hammering whatever, and the neighbor can hear it down there, even though it's inside, it's still a violation. So that's where I think, there needs to be, I just want to clarify that, where you can't do it where it causes a noise disturbance across the real property boundary.
Right. And I think that's important to consider going forward, because some of these construction sites are right against the properties of current residents, and we're going to see more of that going into the future with these bigger developments going in. But also, one of the considerations I'd like to bring forward is that of Jewish holidays. We of course have Christmas and Easter, and one of the most religious holidays which affect our Jewish population is that of Sukkot, where they are required to eat and sleep and do things actually outside. I was wondering if there's any way we could visit some of those holidays too, and maybe look at a cutoff for their holy holidays. I know, I see the face.
No, I'm just thinking of all the holidays.
Right. There's a lot of holidays, but that's why I'm bringing up just the most affected by noise. And I know Mrs. Fells did bring this up, the holiday of Sukkot. And she just suggested in a very thoughtful email to me that, although it's the first 48 hours of that holiday are most religious, and they can't do any work or use electricity or any amenities if a 5 p.m. end to construction would allow them to eat outside, have their peace, connect to family, connect to God, and so forth. If we could just be respectful of that, I'm adding that in, but I'm also, like I said, maybe an earlier stop time or a later start time. I'm not looking so much on weekdays, but weekends, so we give our citizens some relief. And I was just wondering what everyone else thought, and I know that Mrs. Fells is online, and I'm hoping that she can contribute as well, but
I just have a couple questions. The incident that you're specifically talking about, and maybe Tom, you can clarify, was that just basic outdoor roofing, or was that an emergency repair?
Well, it was outdoor roofing, but they thought since they lost the day due to the storm, that they could make up that day on Sunday.
Okay, so it wasn't an emergency repair.
Not that I, no, it was
The
just regular
specifics being,
construction.
somebody's house, had a problem.
No, it was,
Okay, all right, I just wanted to clarify that, because I thought it was.
well, they turned, what I understand is the subcontractor, they termed it as emergency repair, where, to us, it was just, what I understood was they were out there due to, they lost the day because of the snow and they wanted to get the roof put on, and they just wanted to get it done before anything else would happen to the lumber.
I think there was another storm coming. So
Right, I understand.
yeah.
And I get, and my other question, and I can certainly respect Mrs. Fells and the situation with the Jewish holiday. I guess I would question two parts of that. One is, how many Jewish holidays are there where they have to be outside? Because candidly, I don't know that. I'm not. And secondly, in deference to the Jewish population in the township, we need to address other religious groups in the township if we address one. And again, I don't know necessarily, as a Catholic, we don't have to be outside at any time. So, and I don't know the other religions to say that I do or don't know. And I think we would need to know that in fairness to other groups, the Muslims, et cetera, you know, if they have things that have to be done. I just don't know that. And that's something that I would want to know specifically before I just say, just a Jewish holiday.
But generally speaking, on a weekend, if someone has a 5-day work week, I can understand that construction, they want to get done, they want to get in, especially with the light in the summer, you have the longer days, they want to get in early, they want to get out. I feel that on weekends, we should be able to give our citizens some relief. I think 7 o'clock is, I think it's too early. I think we could afford to give our citizens a later start time and give them some relief.
Well, yeah, that's a different issue than not having any, yeah, I don't disagree with that. Quite a few of these are at 9 o'clock on weekends.
Yeah.
Because I have a more overarching question for all of this, just in general, because I don't know the answer to this. This citizen concern was born out of work on a Sunday by a company that's building a new home. Does the township, how do we alert a builder or a developer, or even homeowners for that matter, that this ordinance is in place? Is it routinely handed out with building permits that we're making them aware across the board for projects that would require noise, so that we make sure everyone's aware? And is that an avenue to certainly begin to help the township get into compliance and understand this ordinance, so that we don't have multiple types of concerns down the road because the builder just flat out doesn't know what South Whitehall's parameters of the noise ordinance are?
I think that's something we can look into and see if, because the building permits have a lot of information on them. And I'll go through it and see if there's any mention of it. But it's an excellent idea, like just to put it on the permit so that they're aware that, you know, here's our ordinances and any other pertinent ordinances that have to do with construction.
Dave, I'm pretty sure it comes up in the pre-construction meetings for the big projects, but in this situation, this project was approved how many years ago?
Well,
we have
and it's
other building
individual,
houses, so-
it's individual contractors.
Right.
Is the difference.
Right.
So like the individual, that development, all the homes are being built individually. So they have individual building permits and it's a different contractor every time. But like you said, for even a resident putting a deck up, you know, if they're doing it themselves, they're gonna wanna do it on the weekend. So they need to be made aware that that ordinance is in place. And the best place to put it is either on, when we hand the issued permit, whether we can put something on that, or if we just put it on the application. But I can certainly look into, if we don't have it, putting something in, and then also look to add other important ordinances that they might have to comply with. Because I know there's some stuff on there, but I'll just have to look into it.
Sure. I know when we first adopted the ordinance that I thought we printed up some flyers that we had available. I mean, in the short term, maybe we can start at least giving those out when the permit's coming in,
Right.
For those
Yep.
projects that might end up potentially needing to comply with the noise ordinance.
I have a more general question. I noticed that there are what appears to be a considerable number of noise complaints related to Dollar General, which I know is a relatively new, store. Are those, first, couple points, are those complaints coming from the homeowners who live behind Dollar General? And what is the complaint? Yes, noise, but I guess my question is, what's causing that noise?
Right. A lot of the complaints regarding the commercial stores have to deal with, one, the violation of the state idling law. Okay, where you're only allowed to idle for 5 minutes while you're there, etc. And some of the other ones are the hours that they're coming. They're coming before hours and sitting there and waiting, things like that. So what'll happen is the police will go out, they'll talk to the drivers, they'll educate them, give them warnings, showing them, this is the law, et cetera. But, it could be 10 different vendors, but I think the things at the Dollar General got a little better with that over there, because they do have they're supposed to post no idling signs, that's state law. And if you want a copy of the idling law, I can gladly get it for you, just so you have it.
No, I'm good. Actually, you see those signs in a lot of establishments. Okay, all right, so it's generally
The truck.
the trucks.
Mhm.
Okay, all right, and is it generally like after 5 or at night?
Well, the trucks can come in starting at 7 till 9, I believe.
9 at night.
Yeah.
And then there's also, sometimes there's a zoning or a condition
7 to 10.
as part of the approving resolution that says deliveries between a certain
Right.
time frame. Dollar General has one of those.
Right.
So it was, in addition to the noise ordinance, there was a condition of approval that said you must deliver between these hours.
And the zoning trumps, obviously, the hours of the noise ordinance.
So are the complaints such that the noise ordinance is being violated, or is it actually sometimes residents who aren't aware of the Dollar General's rights, let's say, offload trucks between 7 and 10?
I think most of the time, it's most likely the noise ordinance, the idle law part of it.
Or
Yeah.
at any hour?
Correct.
Got it.
And that's one of the issues, not only there, the Giant and other places.
Right.
So, and that's something I know they deal with that.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if there was a common thread, what's generating these. So, all right, thank you. Sounds like that's a little unique to, the resident concern that we're starting the meeting with. Okay.
I just have a comment, not a complaint or question. When I first read the ordinance, I thought the best thing in it was, and I still do, what Tom already said, this fact that you're not supposed to be able to hear noise on the opposite side of a property line. To me, that's very objective. I mean, either you hear it or you don't. It's not subjective of, well, I can hear it, but it's not based on volume. It's not based on what the disturbance is. It's not based on subjectivity of how annoying it is. I think it's the best thing in the entire ordinance.
So Amy does want to speak, so I can put her on. I may, because it's going through the computer and we work through the TV, hopefully we can hear okay. Amy, you can unmute.
Okay, hi, sorry, I can't seem to make the camera go on tonight, so.
That's ART's not working.
Oh, okay. All right, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for all of this discussion. I appreciate that you are taking all of this into consideration. I jotted down a few notes while we were talking, just so that I could kind of touch on some of the things that were said and maybe answer some of your questions. First of all, I do totally agree that all religions should be taken into consideration, and that was something that I said in when I spoke last week, that the calendar of all religions should be looked at. And as far as the holidays for the Jewish religion, in which we spend a lot of time outside, I did email Commissioner Hodges. Is that the correct title? Okay. The information regarding the Jewish holidays, and Sukkot is really the big one that occurs outside, in which we eat outside for an entire week, all of our meals. And there are some other very religious holidays, and you know, that don't happen outside, that do have big family meals inside. And I suggested maybe on those holidays, maybe if possible, you know, the construction could end by 5 o'clock. And there's really only three other holidays that would involve. But as far as Sukkot goes, my request was that if possible, when Sukkot occurs, that the construction could end by 5 o'clock, so that a situation doesn't occur again that we had this past year, which basically our holiday was pretty much ruined, because the house directly behind me, the main building was being constructed at the time of Sukkot, and it was the entire week, and it was very disturbing. And if any of you have any questions regarding anything related to this, I'd be happy to answer them. My request for Saturdays was that it not begin until 9 o'clock. Now, I will tell you that this past weekend, I did see an improvement. The construction people did not show up until 10 minutes before 9 o'clock this past Saturday. When they did show up, I will say it was very, very noisy. And they had like a bulldozer thing, and it was beeping and beeping and beeping and beeping because it was going back and forth. And then it got stuck on the ice or the mud or something. And then for a half an hour, I had to listen to the wheels grinding away while they were trying to get it to move. But thank goodness it wasn't at 7 o'clock in the morning. So I don't know if anything was said to them. But, you know, another thing that I brought up was that possibly through the months between May through September, that they only be able to work on a Saturday from 9 in the morning until 12 noon, because for years and years and years, we've had all this construction behind us, and it's really not fair that on a summer afternoon, on a Saturday, that we can't comfortably invite company over and know that we will have peace and quiet in our backyard. So that was another thing I wanted to bring up. As far as the house behind me that was working on their roof, I don't know about construction, but I feel like if they know a storm is coming, they should not be starting a roof that they can't finish. I don't know how long the wood can be out there, but the wood is out there unexposed for a very long time. And I mean, these workers were not out there on Martin Luther King weekend, which was a holiday 3-day weekend. They were able to skip that weekend, but you know, it's the whole thing just is very bothersome to me. So I just think that, you know, a lot more thought needs to be put into the consideration of the people who are living along this construction that has for years and years and years been listening to noise. I brought up other things that don't have to do with noise, which I'm not going to talk about again tonight because I know this is about noise, but I just think that some serious consideration should be, you know, we're nowhere near finished with this construction. So that's what I wanted to say about for tonight.
Thank you for your comments, Amy. We appreciate you giving us your perspective of the construction that's near your home. So thank you for helping us understand.
Sure.
So, is there anything that you can add just from an overview? I know there's a lot that we need to consider and look at our current ordinance and consider some of this information. We certainly can't make a decision tonight. We're here to understand the concerns, look at our ordinance, and and move forward. So I just didn't know if there's anything you could offer us tonight.
Can I just jump in just
Sure.
to play devil's advocate, just so we can look at both sides of this, because I do think that's important. I think it's also important to note that homeowners who have, jobs during the week rely on the weekends to do work on their homes as well. So I would just keep that in the back of our minds as we're doing this, because if we adjust the times to 12 o'clock on a Saturday, we could start seeing a lot more complaints coming through the door from your average resident that, is trying to get caught up on housework at home, whether it's landscaping or construction work, if they're framing out their basement, running a circular saw in their garage. I just think it's important that we look at all aspects of this. I understand the concern, and believe me, I don't envy her position right now, because I know there's a large house being built right behind her home. So, but we just need to be mindful of all residents as we, look at adjusting this ordinance in the future.
I agree, that's a good point. And one other thought that I was thinking about is discussing early start times. Obviously, in the summertime, the day is much earlier than the middle of winter, so. Or even homeowners doing work on their homes, there is a balance that needs to be I think there's a balance there as well. We've got to be careful too.
And Tom did just point out to me, that was my fault. This section does not apply to the use of domestic power tools, so I do think that's covered. But so I think that's covered actually.
So homeowners can use that circular saw for their basement.
Am I allowed to just follow up about that?
Yep, I was about ready to read your chat.
Okay, yes.
I had to mute you because the keyboards were coming through.
So again, when I spoke last week, I really, my complaints and issues are really being directed at the construction that's going on with this new construction behind me. I'm not really talking about your typical day-to-day, normal, everyday projects, because everyone has projects to do, and I agree, but those projects might be one time. And, it's a completely different situation than every single day, day in and day out, hearing banging and bulldozing and all this stuff that's been going on for years and years and years, 6 days a week. My direction was really aimed at the construction in this new neighborhood.
So one of the things that, we're kind of brainstorming and ideas are popping in my head. One of the things that we do through the building permits is we differentiate between new construction or residential adds or alts. So we have that ability to apply something to just new construction. So if it's a new home, it's going to take months to put up. So there may be a way that we can, like if we have something about new construction, we can put that on the new construction permit that says this is the noise ordinance for new construction. Just kind of throwing ideas out there of how we can make things work with our current system is one thing that we could do with that. The other thing I jotted down is we can go ahead, if we want to pursue, adding holidays, we can send letters to all the places of worship in the township and ask them for, a list of holidays that they would recommend, noise ordinance times, and things like that. That'll give the board more information to make a decision. So we'll have all the places of worship in the township and their recommendations, assuming they get back to us, of course. But
I think we got the gist of the overall concern, and Tom and I and Dave can work on, providing a potential update to the noise ordinance for the future consideration of the board.
Because that ordinance is gonna be opened up anyway due to the snow removal activity and fireworks.
Right.
So now's the time to adjust anything in there. So, I mean, if you don't have a copy of it, I can get you one. You know, please read over if there's something that needs to be changed or adjusted or whatever. Now's the time to do it when it's gonna be opened up for amendments. And that, you know, like, I don't know which commissioner the other night said about, you know, over a couple of years to, you know, review, see if there's any tweaks. That's a good idea. I don't know which one it was the other night. But, you know, we can do some homework on it, see what things we can come up with to give you information to support, you know, decisions that you want to make moving forward.
Any other comments from the board on this particular?
I don't have a comment. I'm just wondering, what is the timetable that perhaps the board can anticipate? And, I mean, it could be a range of time, a month, 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, so we did our January ordinance review workshop with this board just a month ago or so, and we defined a process for ordinance adoption. So typically, what we wrote down that night was a 30-day review period from the BOC. Once Tom and I have a chance to, and with Dave, to formulate some new language, what we'll do is we'll send a red line version to the Board of Commissioners. Give you guys 30 days to look at it, provide feedback to us. We can incorporate that feedback if everybody's in agreement with it, and then we'll send that off to the solicitor for review. And then what we'll do is we'll get it on a BOC agenda for any further direction and discussion, come back to subsequent meeting, ask for permission to advertise, and then I think not the following meeting, but the meeting after that, it would get voted on. Because it has to be advertised for, I think, 10.
Yeah.
I think there'll be a gap in meeting date. So it will be the second meeting after permission to advertise, where we can actually take a vote on it. So that was kind of the process. We talked about that night in January when we had our ordinance review. Now, you know, if it's something the board wants to move faster on, you know, we can have that discussion. But just trying to stay in line with what we all agreed on back in January as this new process, you know, so there's public comment, ample opportunity for everybody to hear it and they understand that it's coming forward.
There's a question from Rob Hodges, 1707 Penn's Crossing. If the noise ordinance gets changed, do the construction projects already in progress get grandfathered in and can continue under the old ordinance, or must they immediately follow the new ordinance?
I believe there's a 30-day period where it becomes
So I don't believe that it's a grandfathered ordinance. There's some that are, but this is not one of those that would be grandfathered. But there's a certain time frame before it becomes
30 days after
enforceable.
adoption.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for the answer. Yeah, that was a great review of what we had talked about months ago. Thanks.
So no other comments in the chat on this topic?
Just said thank you.
Okay. Thank you to the residents for their input. Board is asked all their questions and answered, so are we ready to move on to the next?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Tom, for being here to help us with.
No problem. And like I said, I'll get a copy of the ordinance out to all of you so you can have it and leave whatever changes, questions, let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so at this point in the meeting, we will move on to items B and C, which we will do sort of concurrently. First one is an ordinance establishing committees of the Board of Commissioners. I believe all the commissioners should have received an email copy of that draft for our first public opportunity to come together and review. And Brad, since you have drafted this, did you want to do the introduction?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yes. Yeah, what I've done is just draft, as President Kelly said, an ordinance that I've titled Establishing Committees of the Board of Commissioners. I spoke a little bit about it in our meeting last week. So just to review a little bit of how I introduced it, and the reason for it is it formalizes the existence of current and potentially future committees in one document. It establishes a formal process for selection of commissioners to these committees. It allows for the development of specific function and responsibilities of these committees so that we all know, exactly what we're doing, at least have a goal, a mission statement. It provides for the opportunity to make recommendations. This is speaking of the committees to the full board. And it requires committee meetings to be open to the public, which is not a current practice. I guess in general, philosophically, what I'm trying to do is what I know Lehigh County as a government does. And I think, Dave, you would know this, the Parkland School Board has a formal process for committees. Is that?
We have committees.
Yeah, okay. So it also can, if this is implemented in whatever form it takes after we're done working on it, it would position South Whitehall as a leader in local municipalities, and it would serve as a guide for other municipalities to also do if they're so inclined. So it'll be a blueprint for them as well. This is an important part for me personally, and I stress this because to me it's an important ingredient. It would help cultivate a culture of complete transparency in South Whitehall Township. Tonight, this workshop is actually an example of resident input into, in this case, workshop. These committees would be operating under the same transparent umbrella. The last thing that I can think of is that these committees allow, with the selection of commissioners on these committees, to focus their attention using their expertise and their level of interest to focus them to do the important work of South Whitehall as those two commissioners report back to the full board. So that's a brief introduction for the purpose of this legislation proposed. I put it in this form. It could easily have been in some other form, a draft bullet point type thing, but I used language that would need to be certainly reviewed if this goes forward, but that's it. It's really just a draft of the idea, but I put concrete points in here so that we know exactly what I'm trying to accomplish.
Thank you very much for introducing and for bringing this to the board for discussion tonight. I'll open the floor for commissioner discussion and questions at this point.
I think
I have to look you up on the voter registration to confirm that.
I think I have the age.
Well, first of all, thank you for putting this together. My first reaction was it will provide a benefit and value to the township. I wrote down just a few basic comments and probably paraphrases some of the things Brad said. The ordinance puts basic standard government structure and definition where none currently exists, right? It just, there's nothing at this point in time, and you're putting something in this place. You're putting this ordinance in this place. So I think that's a positive. And one part of this that you didn't mention, I'm actually surprised you didn't mention it, but it's in there. The ordinance clearly establishes that it's the BOC that has complete authority and accountability for all committees. And I think that's a major point. And that would include committee creation, dissolution, purpose, membership, and reporting requirements. You've mentioned the transparency several times. I think that's a major aspect of this. I just want to mention one other thing. So there's something new. So this ordinance says, well, there's standing committees and special committees.
Hello.
Hi, welcome. Got a couple chairs over here.
This is 27, wasn't it?
6 o'clock.
Oh, you're cute, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Water over there.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Going?
No,
Where?
Mike, you threw some residents in.
Yeah. So just, since you're just arriving, we're on our second topic. And the topic right now is a proposed, it's a draft ordinance on committees, township committees. So my last point, so the ordinance says, hey, there's standing committees and special committees. So it's like, well, what's that all about? A standing committee, as I understand it, will typically exist to address ongoing township business. So like, we have existing committees, and I think they're largely standing committees, like, for example, the Finance Committee, which I'm part of, that's a standing committee, right? But then, okay, what's a special committee? I paraphrase the ordinance by saying it's created to address a specific problem or issue and accomplish a specific goal, and then its need goes away. That's a little, maybe a little ambiguous. So I'd like to offer, I think we had a special committee. I think in January 2020, the township agreed to form the Land Preservation Committee. And it wasn't a standing committee to work on everything associated with land preservation till the end of time. It had a very specific purpose. We were drafting the mission. And the mission was to look at the resources required for land preservation and to decide whether we're going to issue an election referendum to increase EIT. All right. And I think after that committee, it would have been special committee, after its purpose, it probably would have dissolved. Or it would have evolved into something else, I just offer that as an example of a special committee that is in our fairly recent past.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example, and that is what I intended to do here, is just make the provision for, there's gonna be topics somewhere along the line, sometime in the future, that the board or the staff finds the advantage to studying and reporting out, making recommendations. But once that work's done, then the committee dissolves. But, it's a way to incorporate into this document the possibility that special committees will be formed at some point in the future. That's all.
Thanks.
I just have a couple of comments, Brad.
Sure.
Or in general. We're throwing around the word transparency all the time, okay? I ran on that platform. I understand that, and I think we're all transparent. However, there's always a however, there's something. There are situations where, be it a committee or a subcommittee, I'm not saying special because we don't have it.
Right.
That within that committee, you may need to have an executive session, okay? And you cannot be as transparent to the general public as you need to be, i.e., when you talk about, and I don't mean public safety as we had on Monday, that's open to the public. But there are certain things that are discussed possibly in the fire subcommittee that unfortunately need to stay in a committee. They're for safety reasons, okay? So I think we need to be careful when we throw around the word transparency. This township could not afford to open up everything to every resident. And it just, as do companies or school districts or whoever. That's why there are, so we have to be careful on that.
Dave, I agree, first of all, I agree.
Okay.
And I think when those sensitive and proprietary or even confidential topics come up, then we got to find an avenue to have those discussed appropriately in executive session. So I agree. Is there anything specifically that we could reword? And I can think about it as well, but maybe a rewording, or are you just throwing out caution flag?
Throwing out caution.
Yeah, got it.
And on page 2, I have a question. It's up near the bottom, section 6. Any committee is authorized to seek advice and counsel from individuals who are non-committee members. Counsel has 2 different meanings or different words. are you looking at council, i.e.
Legal?
Legal?
No, so a better word could be substituted there. It's more input maybe.
Because council, then my question in the council part,
Advice.
advice.
Yes.
Well, my council was, who's paying for that council?
Yeah.
If it's a solicitor council. Okay,
Yes.
so advice, okay.
What section?
Page 2, section 6,
Section 6, okay.
the second,
Oh, you know
any
what?
committees authorized to seek advice in council.
Okay, so we can just scratch the words "and counsel," just seek advice. Is that right?
So we're not talking a solicitor.
No.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's all I had right now.
I like your comment about the transparency, because I think it's one part of this that we wrestle with, or we will be wrestling with, and we need to sort of proactively tie this point down. So we have one committee, for example, that is, it's strictly private. We've had discussion at DOC meetings that this committee should be completely public. And there's been not so much discussion about it, but there's been discussion like maybe it's somewhere in between. And I think that's the point David's making, and I concur with it. It definitely needs to be addressed. Almost on a case-by-case basis. So you can put the best words in there, but I think on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, that is a good point. And not only a good point, but it's also a good point to communicate, to anyone listening tonight or additional input into this, that there will be exceptions.
I guess one other thing I like about it, sorry, it says each committee will have a purpose. I actually wrote 2 committee purposes for consideration. I wrote a committee purpose for the finance committee, which I'll share and next time the finance committee can discuss it. And I wrote a committee purpose for a new proposed committee that doesn't actually exist yet, which is the land use committee.
Any other thoughts?
I wanted to, pick up the same section 6,
Okay.
seeking advice from council. I think we need to certainly look to define that. I want to be careful that we're not tapping into potentially staff, overburdening staff. I think, and that's a pretty ambiguous, open, I guess it would depend on,
We could, let me tell you the intention, and maybe, sometimes the solution is to scratch it instead of trying to tweak it. But all I really meant to say is if a committee is formed, and let's just take the finance committee, which already exists. If the committee members have a need or desire to talk with someone in the community who may have financial experience of some kind, this just says that's okay. But that's all that this really meant. And, if in conversation, it would be better to scratch it, we scratch it. If it's somewhat obvious, that's all. Does that make sense?
I think that's something we should talk about further maybe and think about, because the potential is who and which group of people would you potentially ask. There's
Okay.
a wide net there.
Yeah.
And if we're calling in an outside agency to give us advice or an outside person,
Well, all I really meant was, if you have someone who you pick up, you pick up the phone, what do you think about this? That's all I really meant.
I
I guess I would ask, does it need to be spelled out then? If
It may not need
you're
to be.
seeking advice as an individual commissioner, just calling on a friend who might be in the accounting world. I want to bounce off an idea in general, not using specific names or instances.
Firms or,
Right.
Correct.
You're just saying generally in the accounting world, do you do this type of practice? I don't know that we need to
spell it out.
spell that out, just so.
I understand and concur with what Commissioner Kelly's saying. We have examples where some committees have cast a wide net, maybe a wider net than we would have thought.
Okay.
And on page
Can we
3.
pause here for a
Oh,
second?
sorry, sure, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I just want to maybe bring closure to that. Are we okay with scratching that?
I personally am. I don't know that it needs to be.
Okay.
I'm just being cognizant of time. I'm not trying to rush anybody. I did have a question on the standing committee section, and I guess the word committee is what we currently have for fire and finance are subcommittees, which are more working groups of 2 commissioners as opposed to committees, which we have Park and Rec Committee and Civil Service. You know, we have different committees, and these are more subcommittees, so there's a delineation there in what we currently have. And if you're looking to establish something different, I think we need to build that out a little more to understand that. And the pension committee specifically, I know is addressed in our ordinance under the police pension plan. There's specific, and it's tied to our pension plan. And I think we need to flesh that out to see. There are specific rules about who's on and the duties and delegations of that pension committee. I think we need to be careful to try to lay this on top of that. I didn't read it thoroughly, but I did look to see if we had anything. Something in my mind told me we had something defined, and we do. It's ordinance 5840. Article 4 is the police pension plan.
And that's an example of, we have a document elsewhere that's not included anywhere else. And there might be other examples of that too, as well.
I think it builds into the pension plan of the police department and the employees of the township. It's a different, when we're talking about committees, it's a little bit different, and it's addressed through actual pensions of the township.
So maybe we can talk offline and make sure I get a better understanding.
Yes.
Okay. I will say on that topic, I'm confused, so maybe you can help me. I don't know the difference between a subcommittee and a committee. I mean, generally speaking, I do, but in the way we use it in the township, I don't. The fire department, that's a subcommittee of what committee? That's what I wouldn't understand. So why do we call it a subcommittee instead of a committee?
Well, I think historically, I personally don't understand enough about it, and I would like to know more, and I don't even know who to touch for that information, but
I think the fire subcommittee is a subcommittee of the public safety committee.
Okay.
that's.
So I think what it sounds like we're talking about here is subcommittees of the Board of Commissioners. So they're under the purview and formed by, like you said, 2 Board of Commissioners to work on a specific topic or specific purpose. So maybe it's subcommittee of the Board of Commissioners so that you have that differentiation, because there's committees and they may be called subcommittees or commissions or things that are established by ordinance, like the pension committee, and there's standalone guidance on those. So I think for this, you may be looking to get something a little more specific that doesn't touch that side of it.
Dave, are you saying that instead of using the word committees, are you suggesting we should say subcommittees?
If you say, or
Of the board.
or committees of the board,
Committees of the board.
or somehow, and there's times to figure out the exact language, but somehow to differentiate between committees and commissions and things that were set up by ordinance, and then things that are set up at the will of the BOC to accomplish a specific purpose or a specific task, so that you have that differentiation is kind of all I'm saying. And I don't know the best term for it at this point.
Yeah. So as you're speaking, the fire department is a subcommittee of the public safety committee.
I believe.
Well, wait a
But
minute,
it's not
I've been on
listed.
public safety for 25 years.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I've ever
Is that,
heard
so I may be wrong.
I've
It does
never-
make sense.
I've
though,
never heard it, but
because it is the fire
if you
chiefs.
were in this room Monday, at the fire subcommittee,
Right.
it ended at 7 o'clock. Maybe 2 or 3 people left the room because we went into the public safety committee. So it's, so that makes sense, but it's probably not defined anywhere. Because you have your fire chiefs on subcommittee, you have your fire chiefs in public safety. We don't have EMS, we don't have police, or yes, we did.
We do.
We do.
And EMS was there, the Trinity ambulance, and
And they stay into the public safety meeting. We did not have a commissioner at public safety.
Right.
Remember, I was only commissioner since January.
Right.
I was not as a commissioner there. I elected myself, because I wanted to stay on it. So I'm staying on it, even though I'm a commissioner, I'm still staying on it. But I'm staying on it not as an at-large Parkland member, I'm staying on it as a BOC commissioner. And in fact, Diane sits in on the meetings most of the time. Well, she's been going to them for years. You know,
So-
even as a commissioner, for the last 2 years.
So
and to
the,
that point, just, I do believe public safety has a set of bylaws, and I don't know if it was by ordinance or not, though, but I think
Right.
that needs to be fleshed out.
Yeah, so I think maybe getting an inventory of our committees, subcommittees,
That would be helpful.
bylaws,
And ordinances,
and
how many are actually
and if it
established
was
by
ordinance, yeah.
Right.
Because then you'll have an idea of where you can draw the line. Because it sounds like we're talking about like the committees where we have, like the finance committee, where it's 2 BOC members. Is what it sounds like we're talking about here, but it'll be good to know that structure. If the fire subcommittee is a subcommittee of the public safety and it's written somewhere, it would be good to have that information.
is this part of it? Because this was the confusing thing for me. Like we talk about commission and committee, right? So finance committee, as you just described, 2 commissioners, it's a subcommittee of the board of commissioners. And then it's called, isn't it called public safety commission? And
And it's fire sub.
Yes,
And that's,
but I don't know why. I mean,
we don't know why
We need to do
that's
some
commission
homework
versus
on
committee.
this,
Yeah.
because
Homework.
we need to
I don't know
understand.
why it's not a committee versus a commission. I don't know if somebody, I don't know that.
Yeah, I could look at it.
And I don't know-
At all. I couldn't tell you what.
Yeah,
It's
And I
been
think,
around a long time.
25 years, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm gonna throw one more thing in the pot,
You ever asked?
just because this thought comes to mind. So, I guess it's the MPC. The state of Pennsylvania and every city, every county, city, municipality within the state of Pennsylvania is an agency, right? So the Board of Commissioners is an agency, and that has a legal definition. And subcommittees of the Board of Commissioners is either part of that agency or is an agency. All right, so if we're looking at types of committees and what subcommittees of the BOC, that's part of the government. That's all under an agency umbrella. And we have some other things that have volunteers or are largely volunteer based. The question is that part of the agency too? That's
well,
all.
the thing that comes to mind, and you mentioned the MPC, MPC dictates what the planning commission is and what the zoning hearing board is. And that's part of the agency of the board of commissioners. So, I mean, you're really looking at an organizational chart is kind of what's
I'm just
popping in my
thinking
head.
that
Right, and first class
Yeah.
township code speaks to the
Right.
service committee, and
Yeah.
right, we've got to look at
Yeah.
the structure of the
The overall
laws
structure of
and
how
our
committees
ordinances. And
feed information up or down.
So are we saying, and I think, Dave, you bring up a good point, we need to look at what all of our committees are by name, what are our commissions by name, what are our subcommittees by name, and say, okay, we'll go back to fire. It's a subcommittee of public safety, it possibly is, it sounds like it should be, if it's
Yeah.
not, maybe if it's not, we make it. And then it's okay, then we've got, you take the finance, that's a standalone subcommittee
Of the Board of Commissioners.
of the BOC,
Right.
correct. So that would be a step, not to put more work on you guys, but I wrote down here, public safety, because I didn't know why it's not listed as a standing committee, even though it's a commission. But again,
Right.
the other thing we need to look at
That's
is,
what I was thinking when we were talking about public safety.
Yeah.
It's not here.
and then I'm thinking, we've got to be careful amongst ourselves, I think, that we just don't overdo it. And then having two commissioners on every subcommittee and or commission, I mean, I didn't run for a full-time job. I'm not running away from it, but I didn't run for a full-time job. You know, I've been here every night since January, almost, as everybody. It just gets to a point where we've got to be careful. And we also have issues on committees and boards where we have vacancies from the general public. So, you know, and we have to respect their time. Because, I mean, you know, we've got to interview for vacancies and we still don't even we don't have enough to even fill those.
Yeah.
So that's another, I mean, we've got to be careful and respect our citizens' times.
So if you,
So at this point, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's 7:10, and I know this is very good discussion. But I know we've got other topics, and it sounds like we need to do some more research on certainly some of these standing committees and understanding first class township code, MPC, established township ordinances, so that we know where we're starting before we build the rules and parameters around these. Are we in agreement that we've got to do a little bit of work?
I am.
At this point, are we comfortable convening this subject for now? I don't know who needs to help us with.
We can, I mean, we've been holding bylaws for other issues.
Yeah.
So we can kind of go through.
And I'm sorry, Monica, didn't even get a chance to.
It's okay, actually. Second time you said Dave, you took my
Mike.
comment.
So,
just like a closing comment though, so once again, thank you, because I think you've demonstrated, you precipitated this conversation, which demonstrates the need for this structure and definition, whatever form that ordinance takes at the end of the day.
Thank you. Yeah, this was a good discussion.
Thank you. Were there any comments online? I'm sorry, I forgot.
No.
Nothing.
Monica, do you just want to say?
No, I said you took it, the second time around, you took it.
And to our late coming visitors, I'm sorry that you misunderstood the time of the meeting. I don't mean to interrupt our agenda, but I don't know if you had a specific agenda item you were interested in.
see what you're doing.
Okay, very good. Well, welcome. Thank you.
Before you leave, look at an application for one of the committees.
I closed my eyes when you said that. It's sleeping already.
Let us know if you think we know what we're doing.
I can follow what you're doing. Makes sense.
Thank you all for that discussion. It was very valuable. And again, thank you.
So if we're gonna get into the flood mitigation, I'm just gonna run out and grab Herb and Tony, ask Tony to come here.
Yes.
Will we go or?
Okay.
Oh,
So, may we ask you your names?
It's Bill and Janet Stanley. Yep.
They,
You were here recently, you were here at the last meeting.
Two meetings, or last meeting, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. We're here.
Oh, the Mount Vernon Road.
Remember, yeah.
The red light. The red light.
I remember when you spoke about it.
Yeah.
Red lights.
Jump.
Diane, Herb just ran downstairs real quick. He's on his way back up, but we could
If you
probably.
want to get us introduced, Randy, to
Agenda?
Yeah.
This? So I'll give a brief overview and then I'm going to turn it over to Mike. I've asked Tony to come here in case we get into some technical related questions specific to engineering as it relates to the flood mitigation grant that we received a few years ago for Cover Bridge Park. It was a grant that we put in to DCED and we're awarded that grant. There was a 15% match. So the township, it is in the budget for $4,500, which is the match for a, help me out with the math here, $30,000 grant, I believe it was. So it was a $30,000 grant. We put the RFP out there as required by DCED, and we received 6 responses. Correct. 3 of those were no bids, to the point where the potential bidders voiced concerns of the overall goal of the project and whether it was attainable or not. We did receive 3 bids for the project, 2 which were over budget, 1 of which were within budget from Gilmore Associates. So I think staff sees some pros and cons with this process here in terms of, is this an attainable goal? Is it going to do anything at Covered Bridge Park? There is a very huge drainage area surrounding the Jordan Creek. What we do at Covered Bridge Park may not matter. So we have a concern that we could end up with a recommended $1 million project here that's going to have very little impact on the flooding in the park. So hence the reason we pumped the brakes on this, felt it needed more discussion. I think we said that in our presentation to the board back in October, November, I believe it was.
November, I believe, yeah.
And we've been trying to get a workshop to have this discussion a little bit more. Some of the pros for it, you know, there's an opportunity to maybe point towards the larger need of a study that would involve other communities upstream and even downstream of Covered Bridge Park. I think that could be a recommendation that comes out of this. I don't think flooding's going to stop at Covered Bridge Park. There could be a different approach to this where maybe we look at, you know, maybe moving some amenities down there, kind of, you know, maybe using boulders or something like that to help deflect some of the water, or as we saw this past weekend, the ice that came through the park. So I think there's a conversation that needs to be had, whether, you see there's really two options here. One, we say thanks, but no thanks. You know, we thought this through a little bit more and we don't want to proceed with the grant. Option two would be to award the project. I guess there would be a third option, which would be look for an extension from DCED, you know, until we wrap our heads around this a little bit more. What we don't want to do is ask for an extension and then not do the project. So I think we're in a position here where we need to really make a decision of, is this something we want to try to do at Covered Bridge, or is this something we want to try to maybe take a different approach to? So we have Herb here, so he can share some of the concerns and the cleanup efforts and what a smaller project's impact may have. As the grant suggests, we also have Tony here to help maybe provide some alternate solutions, as well as, you know, answer any technical questions that may arise. But I hope I didn't steal all your thunder there, Mike.
No, you, I mean, that was more than a brief overview. That was pretty much what I was gonna say.
Okay.
So that's the background history of it. When I received the bid through Penn Bid, it raised a yellow flag in my head as far as, you know, I've done a lot of RFPs over the years and I've never seen one that had 3 firms, half the firms respond saying that your scope's not attainable. So that raised a red flag, and I thought that it warranted some discussion before we went ahead and completed the study. Again, staff's kind of divided with different departments as far as what we may or may not get out of completing the study. We would have to ask for an extension if we proceed with the study. The grant was only good for 2.5 years. It was awarded at the end of 2019, around out in June of this year, which would just not be enough time for the study to be completed. I have spoke to DCED. They said that they are seeing a lot of extension requests now, especially with COVID. A lot of things were kind of delayed. So they said that should not be a problem if we do, in fact, want to proceed with it.
Questions from?
The way I understand it from being new to this board is covered, and I've seen it, well, from a distance, because you can't get there. When it floods, it's a mess. It just floods like crazy.
Yep.
So I think your comment, Andy, is, I don't know anything about flooding, but I really have to question the amount of flooding that's there, if you can mitigate that.
I don't think we're
I
gonna be
mean,
able to.
you might be able to mitigate some of it, but I mean, I've seen the ice.
Yes.
In fact, there was a thing on New Neighbor, that, I mean, the ice chunks are huge, come up 309, you just sit off to the field.
Yeah.
And I'm
Way
like,
big.
oh my God. And you know, to spend money, it would be a waste for this township to spend money, in my opinion. And then find out that in a year or two, you know, when we have another a big flood, and we have them more often than not. It's not one of these 100-year things, you know. It just seems that it's back again. And we all complain, we all say, well, that equipment's there, blah, blah, blah. But I just don't see, and I think you brought it up, Mike, when you said 3 firms says you can't do it, you know, and they're being candid with you.
Right.
So not that they come up with an additional, you know, oh, we can do it, but it's gonna cost us X. We can't do it. So they're being candid about it. Tony's shaking his head, yes, and saying, and he's the engineer, I'm not, saying, you know what, maybe it's a situation where, hey, we gotta live with it. And, you know, whatever happens, it happens, and Herb and his guys, unfortunately, get in there and clean it up, and maybe we go for 6-8 months, maybe a year,
This
and
is
does it
the-
again. I mean, I don't want to be negative, but, you know, there's some things that's a unique situation there where I do like the idea, and I don't know how you would do it. Maybe that's through the study, is putting barriers or blockades and, you know, where you divert some of the water away, but, you know, to be able to, you know, God forbid we did that and they just take that away.
It's not so much the flood water itself, it's the debris or the ice it brings with it.
Right.
So, you know, maybe some deflectors, you know, getting creative with boulders or trying, you know, the majority of the park is in the floodway.
Sure.
Floodplain, the floodway,
Both.
which is a very standard practice throughout the state. You see a lot of your parkways or your community parks, these larger parks are built along creeks because really no other land use for it. You can't build houses there, X, Y, and Z. So, you know, I know when the state comes in, they say, hey, South Whitehall gets it. This is, you know, how we like to see parks built. But with that comes risk, you know, of amenities that, you know, are going into the park to, you know, provide services for the residents. So, you know, do you want to jump in here, Tony? Maybe?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm kind of,
No, that's
I don't
okay.
want to interrupt anyone. I mean, our company has done a lot of work in floodways and a lot of stormwater management also, and we looked at this and we have a lot of history with this area too, and we know it floods. It's all in the floodplain and it's understood. And I think that what we looked at is you have 70 square miles coming into this park. I mean, you're talking from the Blue Mountain, Weissenberg Township, Low Hill, all this comes to the park. So to your point, is you can't stop the water. Nothing that we are going to do is going to stop or lessen the water. In fact, it's going to get worse. Unfortunately, it's just going to get worse as development happens. Even if they follow every single regulation, it's going to get worse. So I think that in terms of thinking that we can do something to make this thing perfectly dry, probably will never happen. Not ever. Now, what I talked to Randy and Mike about, actually heard too about, is what can we do? Obviously, it takes a day for your guys to know that the storm's coming, to go through, take all the amenities out of a couple facilities, move them to higher ground, get through, the storm comes, the water recedes, it's a day back, plus all the damages. I mean, that tolls you money every year. And if it's happening, 3 times last summer, somewhere in that
There
range.
was three major floods down there in the last 2 years.
So what I talked about is the study itself is available. So FEMA does studies of streams. They don't, the tributaries are like a guesstimate. It's more of they call it an A zone, which means that what they do is they guess where the flood is. When someone develops, they got to figure out. When they have a stream like this, they have an AE zone, which means that FEMA went through and did cross sections. There's been some changes, obviously, but they did cross sections and they have a study done. They can give that to us. It's available.
The study that was, when,
It's the same one we have on our zoning board. It's back up to.
yeah, but one of the issues, just to give a little background, I'm one of the pros for doing the study, to full disclosure. But when we looked at the data that was available, and I've done some flood modeling and when I was at LDPC, not at engineering level, just like big picture stuff. But the data that was used for the FEMA studies was based on LiDAR data that was taken in 2000, I forget the date, 7 or something.
Okay.
So when we looked at the 2007 data, when we were discussing this grant, the gabion baskets that were installed were not showing up in that data. So it was actually, it looked like when they were constructing or installing the gabion baskets, because you saw basically a ramp going into the stream, and it looked like they were getting ready to put it in. So my take on the whole project is, and this goes back to stream geometry 101, is you don't want to stream with banks like this, you want to stream with banks like that.
We've created a canal.
We've
down there as well.
created a canal that speeds up water as it increases and goes through. So,
And it also, at places, I think, artificially diverts that water.
Correct.
And it's not a natural stream anymore.
Correct.
so my take on this study is it will hopefully address some mitigation measures to get the stream banks in a trapezoidal thing. And then also point to a bigger study, because when I was at LVPC, I think it was Bethlehem City had a grant, a flood grant, and I don't think it was the same thing. But they went through that smaller grant and it indicated a larger grant. They ended up doing a whole study on the Monocacy Creek and changed all the stormwater numbers and came up with the green infrastructure plan and did a lot of really great work for that watershed. So to me, and this is planner Dave, a little plan can point to a bigger plan, and you got to start somewhere. So that's my take. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
It's good to hear both sides. I mean, you can see why we're kind of, on the fence with it.
And can we hear from her? I mean, we've heard from everyone around the room. I know that as head of public works, you're the ones that are down there when it's this extreme flooding. You can give us your perspective from what you've seen.
Yeah, it's a disaster when it floods. All the sediment from the stream comes out. We have to remove all that sediment. It gets a little frustrating having to do this over and over and over. We'll put the picnic benches under, move them out. There's a lot of damage that happens when this happens. We have to fix all the grass all the time. It's just endless. All the debris ends up in the fence lines. We have lost split rail fence in these floods already. We have had guide rail knocked down in these fences already. So it's a lot. And when I say we are down there cleaning it up, sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's longer. Sometimes we put out for volunteers to come help us, because this could be a month cleanup if we don't get help.
Thank you.
But I have other worries of doing the study with this, of just doing it at one area. Like Dave said, this could open the horizon for a bigger scope, because down the road on Iron Bridge Road, we have some stream bank erosion, which is the exact same Jordan Creek that runs through there. So what we do here, how do we fix down there also, so we don't have the same problems? And not that we're just forcing the water downstream faster and harder and taking this bank out even quicker.
Can I ask the name of the firms who declined to submit?
Sure, yeah, it was T&M Associates, Rich 2, and Spot Stevens and McCoy.
All reputable.
Right.
Thank you.
I will volunteer that I don't know anything about flooding, but I do know when we were to address flooding in our area, there's always the unintended consequences. So are we going to affect someone downstream of us? And what liability does the township have if we're changing the flow of water? But I think it was Tony who said we're looking at taking the water from 70 square miles
Yeah,
coming
that's correct.
into and factoring in trapezoid. I've been down there when it was at its peak of its flood, and even if we had a nice tropical, it's
It will.
well over
Yes.
anything. It's, the
It'll take on
volume
more volume.
is incredible. And
But, yeah, and I
I've
think,
been a volunteer at the park last summer, cleaning up that playground. The amount of debris, some of it harmful. Monica was there with me. Just what it brings, this is something that I think we should probably have a larger discussion about the public safety of having this. Public's there, there's potential for this large flood. People want to go there right after floods and they're on our equipment. They're curious. When we were there cleaning, people were coming in with their kids anyway, even though all of that sediment had just wrapped around all of the posts, and there were families there with their little kids, letting them climb, even though we had not cleaned everything yet, and there were big chunks of porcelain pipes on the ground, sharp. That's a minor sidebar, but this is, I think, an issue that it's a flood zone, we know that. It's something we have to deal with. Do we continue to try to control what we can't control? I think that's how I've done a little bit of research on flooding and the building of parks in them, and some of what I've seen is they do like graduated stone and try to put things up higher. We don't have that going on down there. Everything is low. And so when it does flood, it's all subject to this. And I have to factor in as we consider this, the very thing that Herb just said. It takes you a day to move it all out, a day to move it back in, sometimes longer to clean it up, a couple of weeks. Damages, I know we had an insurance claim. Right after the playground was built.
In August, too.
A severe flood with a large insurance claim. That's something I factor into my thinking, how many of those claims till our insurance rates, again, this is a lot to balance as we consider it's not as simple in my thinking as do we look at this little study. It has a trajectory that opens up an awful lot of considerations for liability for the township, budget constraints, and is this wise for us to work down this road? Just throwing them off the thoughts. I don't know anything about it here.
There are things that we can control. We can't control the flooding. There are things we can control. And along with public safety, when the park is closed post-flood, we need to keep it closed. There are definite dangers there, and people, like Commissioner Kelly said, they're there, they're hanging on the equipment. So I think we need a better way to really close down the park. Public Works, I know you spend weeks, sometimes often, cleaning it up, and that takes away from what you need to be doing in the township with our infrastructure and our, our roads and things like that. And I think we also can control what we put there. We shouldn't be spending a lot of money putting things there that are going to get damaged and covered with toxins and goodness knows what with the runoff. So I think it's public safety, it's financial, it's a big multifaceted problem.
Tony, were you going to recommend or not recommend, but maybe summarize what can be helpful? Now, it's not gonna, I'm sure anything we do there is not gonna stop whatever these were, 50-year floods, 30-year floods, maybe the whole definition of a 100-year flood needs to be revisited. But for lighter type rains, is there something we can do that would be beneficial, even though we know at some point it's gonna flood out? The heavier rain.
I mean, my suggestion, this is my 2 cents from looking in, discussing with people in our company, is with having a model, the whole thing is in a 100-year floodplain. So guess what? If the 100-year storm comes, everything's going to be underwater. But is there a tipping point? And what I mean by a tipping point is, can we get, instead of 3 or 4 times a summer, maybe once every 5 years, maybe once every 3 years, but can we start to analyze some of the facilities that we're actually having the problems with? So pick on Pavilion 2 maybe. You know, it's a great location right by the stream, but there's a pavilion right down by the stream that's always underwater, has damage to it all the time. Can we start to actually do some planning and say, all right, well, we know that the flood elevation always comes here. Is there a better location that we can take Pavilion 2 and move it to that instead of being underwater 3 times a year, maybe it's once every couple of years. And then, yeah, there's a cost associated with it. I mean, moving a pavilion is not free. But can we take some of the data that's there, some of the data that's out there, and start pushing around it? And okay, so let's not take down the 100-year rainfall event. Let's say, let's cut that in half, maybe go down to a 25 or a 10-year storm or something like that.
That's what I.
Figure out now how the floodplain now is here, now it goes to here, and then we say, okay, if this is our boundary, what can we do? Can we lift this up? Can we put a little berm or some extra dirt around here so that maybe in the more normal events, we're protecting the park, the playground, we're protecting the pavilion. We found a new location for this pavilion that's up on the hill a little bit more. We have to move it, we have to get used to a new thing, or push a trail around a little differently. But I think that if there's some concern with that in the township, I think that might benefit, you know, the cleanup effort. If we're only cleaning up grass versus cleaning up a pavilion and benches and replacing this and that and garbage cans and what have you, that may benefit the township. It might slim down the amount of work necessary and might take the day of preparation away. So that's the only thing I could see that you might want to look into, you know, using some of the data that's out there, and then kind of looking specifically how we help the facilities of South Whitehall today.
And I think the data part and knowing what those elevations is crucial. And, you know, the existing, and I don't know if there's an updated model, but the existing data is old. So it's an old floodplain. And part of this study is and granted, it's only for this section, they're going to resurvey and get new data based on current conditions. So that may be enough to give us that information that says, all right, we really should move Pavilion 2 40 feet this way, so it's out of the 25-year flood or something like that. But and this is also my GIS experience, is a lot of these flood studies are done at a very high level. So they're really large pixels. So you don't have the detail that we need to determine where's the best spot to position our pavilion or our equipment and picnic tables and things like that. And when you do these smaller studies, you're getting some of that detail as part of the study. But then again, I'm not familiar with what the latest study out there is. But in the poking around that I did, I found stuff based on the old LiDAR data. So if there is a new one, that would be great if we could just get our hands on that and start looking at it. But again, it's at like 10 meter pixels. So, you know, you're really high, large resolution. So getting the detail is.
I don't want to ask too many detailed questions, because I do want to jump to what is this decision in front of us. And I'm not sure that I fully understand it, but dredging, is that at all a factor? Could it be helpful? Have we ever done it? Or is that just a stupid idea?
They did it above the dam years and years ago, before a lot.
Yeah, because all that
Prior to
stuff's
me.
backing up against the dam.
Yeah, but then you have to watch with how you actually dispose of that material too, because it's considered that.
That has to go to a line layer.
Yeah.
It gets expensive to actually dispose.
Yeah. But the problem I see with the widening, which I fully understand, I would think that could almost be calculatable.
It is.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because they can tell you exactly what's volume.
Yeah, based on the geometry and depth and all that.
The other thing, and this is kind of more of a interest of mine, is naturalization of streams.
Yep.
You know, looking, like Maryland is really big on it, and they're taking channelized streams that are channelized because of sediment, and they're cleaning out 10 feet of sediment and bringing it, restoring banks to natural states where, you know, you have a large riparian buffer to kind of absorb some of that flood water and, you know, those moderate storms, you know, and that's kind of, I think the point is to start looking at moderate storms and handling because the other piece of it is when you have a channelized stream, when the water gets up, it automatically goes all over. But you have a volume and it can absorb more and more as you're going up.
But it also continues to widen.
Right, so there's more volume.
And I know there's discussions, not all positive, about riparian buffers too. So, thank you. I'd like to go back when everyone's done to try to understand the decision that you're asking the board to evaluate.
Can I ask just two quick questions? Upstream and downstream, a few towns. Are other towns having the same problem, getting the accumulation of all the sediment and garbage that comes? Or are we just the lucky ones? And then my other question, which is really, really stupid, but Tony, you're talking about the 70 square mile. I mean, if we have problems and other townships are having problems, you know, is there a way to collectively through the state, I'm sure it has to be the state, to say, hey, look, we're looking at, and you mentioned Blue Mountain, I think?
It was the whole way up to the mountain.
Yeah, and say, okay, from here to wherever the Jordan ends up, you know, maybe somehow we got to look at the beginning of that up there and say, we need to reroute. I mean, that's a grandiose plan. But reroute that stream to a more conducive area that's not going to cause the flooding each and every town down the road. You know, not a discussion for tonight.
And that's kind of what LVPC
But I'm
did,
saying, wow.
that, you know, the Bethlehem grant spurred the Monocacy Creek watershed study, where they did a whole entire comprehensive study of the watershed, which was in, I don't know, 5, 6 municipalities. So that was something that, you know, that's big picture and, you know, a big project, and they don't come around every day, and, you know.
How successful were they there?
What's that?
How successful were they? Because that's over by Music Fest, Bethlehem.
Yeah, I mean, they're not gonna.
So is that?
It's really a policy document that makes recommendations on managing the stormwater. So the idea is everything upstream that you can contain doesn't get downstream. So we're really big on green infrastructure and natural swales and things like that to hold the stormwater where it is, and that's the new reg.
Slow release.
That's exactly what.
Yeah, I mean,
They
there's
do.
regulations that they put into place, but I still think that as development happens, you know, it's gonna get worse, because even if you're holding back the 10-year storm and these big storm events, the volumes coming into Dave's first point, we know it is happening in other townships. I mean, we're having a lot of problems in Bethlehem Township with the Nancy Run and some of the other streams that we have with the same type of issues, is that development came, now the stream is silting up, so to the dredging point that you're losing volume in the stream and there's less and less room. So, I mean, it is not necessarily unique to this, but it happens in this area and you all can see the results. I mean, think through Easton, you know, when Easton floods, it's because of all of us. And that's, you know, you chase that down to Philadelphia, but those floods are because of us. So as you get higher up in the watersheds, you're not seeing it and feeling it. It's as everything starts to kind of accumulate, when you have all these contributing factors, that's when you have the problem. So, you know, LVPC did, to Dave's point, they put out the Monocacy Creek. I think they're gonna try and trip around the whole valley to try and look at each one. I don't know the timing. I know it's.
Ideally, that would be the plan, is the Jordan Creek watershed study
Hmm.
is the ultimate goal.
Who would spearhead that? Would that be a county-led effort or?
It'd probably be LVPC.
WPC?
And, we can certainly, I can lobby for that, but the other point to having this study is it could point to the larger study, and then when we go, either we go for grants or the Jordan Creek watershed goes for a grant, we have this study that says, here's the issue, here's a detailed analysis of this specific issue. We really need to address all of this, and we have that documentation to put in a grant package or submit for a collective grant package for the Jordan Creek watershed.
So I have a question for her. In perspective, I'm assuming you'll be the one to measure. We've had 3 significant storms down there in the last couple of years. How deep are we looking at that? Over
We
by
had the
playground?
one where we got the, what was it, 7 inches of rain in 4 hours or
Mhm.
7 hours or something like that. That water was actually hitting the bottom of the bridge. So that was the worst one. That we had 4 or 5 feet of sediment in the parking lot right next to the dam. There was sediment everywhere. Then there's some where it might only be 6 inches above the ground, but it spreads out. So depending, what is really funny is the last one, we didn't have that much rain, but the river was froze over, so the water stayed on top.
Ground was frozen.
It cracks the ice, and then that makes a huge surge come down with all the ice.
Yeah, I mean, rain's really funny. I hate to say it, but rain and runoff are completely different. So, you get your rain gauges here and it says it's raining 6 inches, but there are times that, Hurricane Ivan came through. We've looked at these things for a while, but 6 inches of rain falls and there's no problems. But guess what? It's August, we're dry and everything soaks in. Whereas we had 2.5, I think I use a website, it's called Wonderman. It's kind of a great little website, but it shows how much rain falls. It has a lot of rain gauges all through the valley, and we had 2.5 inches, but there was maybe an inch of snow on the ground that went through freeze thaw that was dense. So that snow is now an inch of water in the stream. And then to Randy's point, when that ground, we all put
It's been so
dogs
cold.
out. It's just, it feels like you're walking on it's a wet sponge, when it thaws. So when you normally have 80% of water that lands on grass soaking in and you have none, now you're taking another inch and adding to it. So it's very, if I could sit there and say every time it rains, this is how much runoff you're gonna get, it always changes based upon conditions. Like I said, August, you could have a 6-inch rainfall and have that stream down, a foot higher, whereas April, same rainfall, it's completely disaster because of this ground, things like that. So it's a
It
tricky
also
little,
goes how hard it rains and how fast it comes down. If it's just 7 inches of rain spread out in a long period of time, the ground can absorb that. Now, if it's a downpour, more of it's gonna have runoff right to the creeks, and that's when you seem to run into the bigger issues.
And have we given any, when we talk about flooding, I know the same storm that hit last Friday on 309 at Boothsville, there were water rescues, there were cars underwater, and a lot of those homes over there, I don't know the name of that street, they just opened that little market over there. Worley's. So as a township, again, are we addressing what's happening with roads needing to be closed? An entire section of homes are underwater, as we're looking here tonight about a park, but we've also got 309 that was shut down Friday, and all of those homes back there flood. Are we looking at the
Yeah.
larger picture
I think
of,
that goes to Dave's point, we got to start somewhere, and if we're the grassroots effort to try to at least start taking a look at the Jordan Creek, and the flooding concerns we have, and then pointing out those other flooding concerns upstream or downstream, it could trigger the need for a larger study, which you could have PennDOT included on that, because 309 is a PennDOT road. I'm sure they're concerned about that too. The house is right there as well, so it could lead to a larger study.
I mean, it sounds to me, your idea of working with LDPC to get a more regional, other municipalities, this is, in my opinion, bigger than one little section of Jordan. And I do have, we don't have time to go into this, but I've got questions about three no bids by reputable companies, 2 over budget, and how does this last one, think they can do something when 3 said it's not even attainable? I would love to explore further why that one thinks that they can. It just doesn't make any, hard to reckon that in my mind.
I'll just chime in there. So obviously, none of the 6 firms said that they were going to solve the flooding in the park. That's just not feasible, obviously. The 3 firms that did submit a bid are more or less willing to look at it and see if there's anything we can do, see if removing the gate-on basket would help, and if so, in what capacity. Would it save us from the 2-year flood, or something to that effect? Without them looking at it, they don't know, and that's again why we thought it was important to bring it to the 5 of you. As you've heard, we've had many discussions, about the pros and cons of this, and there are pros and cons to proceeding with this study, and we're not sure which outweighs which at this point. I know Herb had some other concerns about possibly, some maintenance items or things that might come out of this study that could add, additional work onto Public Works as well. But I do want to make it clear, this isn't a study to solve the flooding down there. This would just be to mitigate it if we can in any way, shape, or form. And I mean, removing the gate-on baskets could potentially help. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a flood expert. And again, that's maybe what this study would lead to. And the last thing I want to do is have a study that sits on shelf for 20 years and, the recommendations are $10 million worth of improvement, and where it's just not something feasible for us to do, which could happen. It could come out of the study. We don't know what's going to come out of the study.
What's the cost of the study?
We got a grant for $30,000.
Yes.
Our contribution would be $4,500, but actually they came in at $32,400. So it'd be roughly around $4,000.
Dave, I think you said, I'm sorry.
I'm still trying to understand this a little bit. Okay, so immediately it would be 4,500 plus something. That's for a $30,000 grant, which we would have to renew that anyway in order to get it. And that grant, that $30,000 grant does what about the bids? We would be, our ultimate thing is 4,500 plus a little smidgen more, plus what was the low bid?
The low bid came in at $32,400.
So that's the cost of the study.
That's the cost of the study.
So DTED will fund 85% of that $32,000.
Okay.
The township would be on the hook for 15% of the total cost of the study.
Got it. Well, and the study is this 32,000 performed by this firm.
Correct. The cost to the township though, because we have the grant.
So our decision right now is just, I don't want to say just, but it's a $4,500 plus whatever, $100 will always happen. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
Whether.
And it is in the budget. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's.
So I had Jacob Roth, 1499 White Oak Road has a question. Do you want to try and unmute?
Sure, can you hear me?
We got you.
Awesome. Yeah, my question / comment kind of has to do with flooding, flood mitigation, and the Wears Dam project. I remember it's probably been about a year now when Michael Baker came and gave their presentation on, what the project might look like for the Wears Dam repairs, and it, I believe, included things like building a temporary dam upstream, and then also repairing, and it actually might have been replacing the abutments at the north and south ends of the dam. has there been any consideration to how a flood, I know they aren't predictable. They can, obviously we've seen they can happen in January or July. So it might be hard to plan the project around that, but has there been any consideration as to how a flood, like the one we got a few weeks ago or even last summer, would potentially affect, the progress of that project? Either, it halts progress, or it, erodes progress that's been made during the project, or it would, in any way compromise the structural integrity of that temporary dam, or Wares Dam, while it's being repaired. So I just wonder if there's been any consideration to that. Is that something we should, the township should be concerned about? Just making sure we don't, either cost ourselves more money by having to redo a project halfway through, or really jeopardizing the integrity of certain parts of that project if there were a spontaneous flood in the middle of that project. So that's just my question and comment.
So.
I was just gonna say my guess is they would probably schedule it during low flow time.
Yep.
So that they're not, number one, not holding back as much water temporarily. And then if there is a flood in the summer, as Tony was mentioning, the ground can usually absorb more water. So that's why we generally don't see as many summer floods as we do spring or winter. That's why I think, and that'll be up on the contractor to work out the schedule and determine the best time to do the project, to exactly like you said, to take into consideration possible flooding issues. So I think once it gets out to bid and we sit down with the contractor, they're gonna have the experience and the know-how and how best to pull this off with as little risk as they possibly can.
Yeah, and we're going to be working with Michael Baker to do the bid specs before it goes out for construction. Make no mistake though, we are working in a stream. The risk is certainly there. We can't control the weather. That's one thing we can't control. But we'll do everything we can in those bid specs to make sure that the township's protected during the construction phase of the rehabilitation.
Awesome, thank you.
There's one more comment. Brian Height just posted a link to the existing Jordan Creek watershed study. Was done in 2000.
Lots happened in 22 years.
So, and there's a lot of watersheds in the Lehigh Valley that are that old. And they go by there's like a regional plan that they reference as opposed to the individuals because they're so old.
Well, thank you both to Brian and Jacob. Did you have any public comments on this topic?
I have one comment or question.
Thank you, please.
Yeah, so this isn't on the flood mitigation, but public safety has been mentioned a couple of times. So flooding is a public safety issue. Is flooding a public safety emergency, like an official declared emergency?
Yeah, we have that at the Ord Street Dam. If that.
We have an evaluation plan and everything.
If it goes high, there's a sensor set in there that when it gets to a certain level, it will send out a robocall to tell people that they're, get ready, you might have to evacuate is the first step. And then the second call that goes out is telling them to please evacuate their homes. There's 9 houses downstream of that could have to evacuate.
All right.
Over by Fairmont Street.
Yes.
So there is an emergency response plan.
Yes.
For that specific
If you would want to see it,
location.
I have it, I just updated it with DEP and the EPA.
I think we had a scare back in that big storm back in August.
It actually.
It crested and luckily it was on its way down. So.
Yeah, preached, yeah.
It is 5 minutes till 8. I know we've got one more item that I wanted to.
I don't know if we're going to get to that tonight. I think we're kind of at the point now where, what's the board thinking? We can go around the room if you guys want and let us know what your thoughts are. If this is something you think we should proceed with. I think you heard both sides, the pros, the cons, the concerns, the benefits. You know, we're at the point where the grant is coming to an end, and we either have to let DCD know if we're going to proceed with this study, or if we're going to look for an extension to continue this study.
In order for me to give any answer, I've heard the entire conversation. What is the consensus among 5 of you?
That's, again, that goes back to why we brought it to the board. Because
Many
there is not
discussions
a
on this, and they don't always see the same way.
All right.
One remaining question in my mind, and President Kelly brought it up. Not to delay or beat this into the ground, but I'm interested in the firm who says they can do something. What is that? Does it make sense to do that? But that's a question I have on my mind. We'd almost have to have them or staff help us. What is it? What is it they can do that someone else is
They're doing
saying?
a study, like saying, that's all they're doing.
Yeah.
That study could come back and say there's nothing they can do.
That's all they're doing. They're doing nothing but a study.
But the other three
I
said
made
the
that
goal
very
wasn't
clear.
attainable. So they're saying the goal of a study is not attainable?
Of taking some of the water out, they're saying there's nothing you can do, you're not gonna stop.
They're saying the scope of the RFP is unattainable. The scope is, are there any measures we can put in place to mitigate flooding?
Not eliminate it, mitigate.
Mitigate
I
flooding,
guess
correct.
that's what I'd like to understand. What scope is this firm saying is possible?
Right, because the ones that were no bidders are, as you said, they're reputable from London. I'm very familiar with, because they do other work with the township. So it's concerning to me that these are the type of responses we get.
Mike, do you think Gilmore Associates would come to
I can ask
a
them.
meeting?
Yeah, if we're allowed to have them here to kind of,
It's kind of unusual, but
But are we allowed to ask the other ones why it's not? Because you need to have both sides of the consideration to understand.
they may be willing to
I
do
mean,
that.
of
I'm
course, they
not
would
sure.
come in and
I
say,
don't know if they
yes,
do that in a
it's
public
attainable.
meeting, but
It gets a little tricky when we're talking about bids.
yeah. we have to be
There's
careful
all
there.
bidding law, but absolutely, we can look into it.
Once the bid is open, it's public.
Correct.
and what I can do is forward you Gilmore Associates in response to the RFP, if you'd like to look at what, they say they can.
That would be a good start for me.
But do we have the reasons from the three that didn't, so we can understand their concerns? as well?
Sure, I mean, they're very
Is there
brief.
detail?
No, they're very brief. Simply stating that they don't feel that the scope's attainable.
So why don't you send us the scope and then send us a little recap on.
Sure.
And Tony, you've seen
We
all
need to
the
see the scope.
bids. And
I just received, we saw the RP, and I just saw what was put in from Gilmore today. So yeah, I briefly reviewed it. And I think that's the truth, is that they're gonna do the study, and I think I think doing a study is probably something that firms can do. Anyone can survey and run the sections and put the storm through. I think that the issue, I can speak personally from us, the issue we had is for that section of creek, we couldn't think of any real reason that fixing that portion of creek or providing anything in that area to fix the flooding in the whole park. So, I mean, the flooding starts, we went down there on Friday, took 200 pictures, the whole way from Cedar Crest the whole way back. All of that's flooded. This is a very flat stream. And what happens with most of the streams in the valley is that it's not backed up because of one spot. There's not one area that really causes log jam, if you will. Sometimes a bridge does it. The bridges in this area are actually very large. So it's one of these things that it's a very flat, just floodplain, and as the water rises, there's just nowhere for it to go. You can, to Dave's point, you can widen out the section, make it wider, and that'll keep a little bit more water in the stream but wherever that tipping point may be, the whole park's gonna go. So that's kind of where we thought we could do a study, we could spend, no offense, but we could spend the money to do a study and do sections, but what are we gonna get out of it? And what is the township gonna get out of it? Mike said it best, it was a study done in other townships that Costs a lot of money. And they studied the whole township, and we went through and that study said, all right, $14 million is your end game to fix the flooding in the township. And everyone just raised their hand and said, how can we afford that today? So I think this is your decision. I mean, there's either you can go through and do the study and kind of go through the fixes, and hopefully it leads to a big, large scale fix like Dave's speaking about that'll help the township in years to come. Or you can go through and try to address the spots now to start to help some of the current facilities and see if, that'll benefit the township in the today age, in the next couple of years, so.
One quick question, how much area, what section are we talking about that's going to be studied?
In the study, it was to the east of the dam, so below the dam, past the S curve in River Road there, which actually is something that hasn't been mentioned in this, but the creek is really starting to erode out River Road there, as I'm sure many of you do know, and that the road's even starting to kind of lean that way. So that's going to be something we're going to need to address down the road, no pun intended, along with Sherrittville and Iron Bridge and a handful of other roads that are starting to erode away. So ultimately, whether or not we go forward with this study to hopefully look at a bigger study, I just think it would be pertinent for everybody to keep in the back of their minds that we probably should be looking for a bigger study one way or another, sooner rather than.
Just that little section?
Correct.
And is that what we asked for, only to study that?
Correct.
And is the reason we're only asking for that is because we're trying to put the trail through it?
No.
No, it's because of the gabion baskets and the channel that's
But aren't the gabion baskets all the way to the
dam.
covered bridge?
Yeah,
But we're only asking for that little section down there,
from the bridge down to the S curve.
from the bridge to the S curve.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, right, that's where the gabion baskets are. The gabion baskets, and again, this grant was written before I started working here, but from my understanding, the gabion baskets are kind of what spurred this, for us to look at that and see if that was a good investment whenever they were put in, or if it was something that, removing them, like I said, maybe the 2-year storm won't then flood into the park, so maybe we'll save, the maintenance on that. Again, knowing that when we get the larger storms, it's still going to flood. There's nothing we can do to prevent the flooding. But is there anything we can do to mitigate it, slow it down, make it a little less severe?
And I think one more thing you could help us with is, there was a mention that Herb had some concern about future maintenance with this. And we don't need to go into it now because it's late, but if you could maybe supply that information to the board so that we're aware of it. If this were to happen.
Yeah, I think that's going to be in the plan. They're going to have a series of recommendations. And when we look at those recommendations, that is when we would evaluate any maintenance.
Correct. Is it something we can do? Is it something we contract out? It would kind of come out of the plan and what the recommendations were of the plan. So again, and Herb, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think his concern was that there may be some recommendations that come out of it that we follow through with, and we're still dealing with flooding down there because it didn't really solve the problem. You know what I mean?
And how much was the insurance claim that we had to put in from the last?
It was built in we had some damage to the house on Brickyard Road as well. 60 or 80?
64 runs it out.
Yeah, it was in that 60 to 80 range.
Yeah, because we had the depreciation that brought it down. If I'm not mistaken, it was in the 63, 64,000.
From the one storm.
Yes.
And that doesn't count public works,
No, that's just for amenities that were lost.
what we lost.
Let's ask the question the other way around. Is it acceptable to do nothing?
It depends who you ask.
Let's see what the five
Because if you ask me, I'm gonna say yes, because the little study ain't gonna solve the issue.
I would say
That's my
no,
opinion.
because I'd say no, because I think there's always something you can do. Are you saying specifically with the study?
No,
Or just in
I'm asking
general?
like this high level holistic question. It's like a lot of discussion about should we do this, should we do this? Almost like, should we do a feasibility study to find out what is the feasibility of solving this problem? That's the highest level statement I can think of in the entire discussion. We come at it the other way around. If we don't do the feasibility study to find out what's feasible, then we're left with the current situation And is that an acceptable current situation?
But see, then I look at it from the RFP bids that you got back, you got more people saying, there's nothing you can do. And you have one saying, I can make this work.
They're not saying they can make it work. They're saying they can do a study and tell you what recommendations and what the quantifiable difference will be.
There was 6 bids, 3 were no bids, 3 were bids, but 2 were over budget.
You know, and they're not saying they're gonna fix it.
Correct.
Yeah, so that's why, because all of it, even if we do something, there's all this uncertainty, right? But we have certainty now. We know what the history's been, and, you know, it depends on, is it a 5, 10, 50, or 100-year flood? Depends on what season it is, right? But we have the current experience. So if we were to say, no, we're not going to spend any money on any feasibility study, and we're going to live with this, is it acceptable for the township to live with this current situation? I'm just coming at it from the exact.
I'm not saying I don't think we should do anything.
Yeah.
I'm thinking what I've always said to Randy, Dave, Mike, we just had this conversation the other day, is I think it needs to be a larger scope.
And
Because
And with our neighbors too. I mean, they're contributing to the problem just as.
Well, that leads back to approaching LVPC to look at a more
right, and you know,
comprehensive study. It's not just us.
correct.
And to Tony's point, it's only gonna get worse as there's more development upstream.
But Dave did have a good point when we just had our conversation. You're gonna gather this data to put into the bigger study. Is it something that can work together to maybe come up with a foreseeable goal that we all have? I don't have the crystal ball to say yes or no for that.
And my take is you gotta start somewhere. And if it's this $4,500 investment in the data, we're gonna have a detailed elevations and floodway capacity for this section of the Jordan. To me, that information alone is worth that investment because it may give us elevations on moving, you know, even under the current condition, like Mike was saying, if we don't do anything, we're at least going to end up with the data. That's going to tell us if we don't do anything based on the current condition, we need to move the pavilion 50 feet up to this other location because the data was done on that section. And it'll go out, so they'll look at the flood channel.
This is a silly question, but I wonder if Kurt could answer where we should move that pavilion, because you know how far that flooding goes.
It's not so much, a lot of it's backwater too. Yeah, a lot of it's backwater.
That parking lot up there.
Yeah, the parking lot up at the top of where Mill.
So how long will it take for the LVPC to do something like this? Is this an
I don't know, it's
unknown?
on their radar.
It's, well, all of the watersheds are on the radar.
Okay.
They've been on the radar since I was there. And the Monocacy Creek one, because of the grant, they were able to leverage it.
I will say it's a good grant. The fact that it's only a 15% match is good. A lot of times it's a 50-50 match, or we've seen 35% match, so a 15% match it is a good grant.
Could you reach out to LVPC to see if there's any interest or?
I'm gonna call
maybe they're
Jeff.
working on stuff that we could.
Yeah, I want to call Jeff tomorrow and just ask him how the Monocacy Creek started, because I know there was a grant, and I don't know how big the grant was for, I think it was the city, Bethlehem City had it. And then somehow they turned that into the big Monocacy Creek study. So I don't know. There's some information there that I want to kind of see if this could turn into the seed that starts the whole study, that would be fantastic. But, you know, we kind of have to I need to reach out to Jeff.
At this point, we are past our time. I appreciate all the comment and thank you all for contributing from Township's standpoint. It's courtesy of the floor. Is there Any comment from?
I understood what you were talking about, I know that. It's terrible, it's a tough spot.
David, is there anything in the?
No.
this chat from anyone? And nothing from any of the board members at this point?
A lot to think about.
Is, well, thank you. This has been a very valuable workshop, a lot of information for us to think about. and consider. I appreciate you all. At this point, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.